is Vonda Adams. We're both math consultants here at KVEC. And the purpose of this podcast is to offer professional learning opportunities to meet the needs of our teachers. And we're going to give you a platform to share those experiences too. Every month, we will highlight a different topic with which we feel every educator needs to know. Each week, the topic will be broken down into content-specific categories. Week 1 will be for literacy. Week 2, mathematics. Week 3 will be for behavior and social emotional. And week 4 is for the low incidence community. Today, we will be discussing developing goals and determining accommodations for mathematics. We are very excited that we have Harvey Caldwell, and he is from Perry County. So we're extremely happy to have him here today, and Miss Lola Taylor, she is the special ed consultant for Perry County. They will be sharing with us, 1, where do we start? Number 2, what to consider. Number 3, how to ensure compliance when determining appropriate goals and accommodations for mathematics. Now I'm going to turn it over to Miss Vonda and let her get started.
Okay. Again, thank you, Harvey and Lola, for joining us today. And I'm going to give you just a moment just to briefly introduce yourself again and tell your title and a little bit about yourself. So Harvey, we'll start with you.
Okay. Of course, my name is Harvey Caldwell, and I've been the special ed director, I guess, I'm finishing up my 12th year. So I will have 12 years completed at the end of this year. So I've got 24 years after this year in the district. So I was a principal for several years, and then I was a SPED teacher before that at the high school level. So my whole career has been in Perry County.
Okay.
And then Lola is just come on board this year as far as the district level, and I'll let her tell you a little bit about her background.
Yes, my name is Lola Taylor, and I am the special ed consultant. This is a new role for me this year for the whole district. Last year I was assistant principal at West Perry, and this is my 21st year in education. And all of those years have been dealing with special education, except for my 3 years as administrator and administrator role. So I'm glad that this role this year has put me in a different perspective as far as special education goes, and I really enjoy it.
Okay.
And believe me, I'm working her pretty hard.
I'm sure you are, Harvey.
Yeah.
You're lucky to have her.
I am. I totally agree with that.
Okay. Well, thank you all for introducing yourselves. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our first question. And our first question is that what is the first step in the process when you're developing goals and determining accommodations? What do you do with your teachers?
Well, and we have a monthly meeting of DRT leads, which is the district review team, and we have a lead at each school. And we actually met this afternoon before this podcast. But one of the things that I'm always trying to tell staff when they're developing a good IEP, and these days and times with new staff, we have a lot of MAT teachers and even emergency certified. Teachers are just not prominent like they used to be as far as in the SPED field or even the regular ed field. But one of the things that we are trying to let our teachers to know to utilize is the IEP guidance document.
Right.
It's kind of like I call it the holy grail of SPED, in that you have a document there that actually step by step writes an IEP for you. And you're crazy if you're not utilizing this document to write your IEPs based on your student needs. So one of the things that we really push is the IEP guidance document and utilization of that to write a good IEP and to make sure that they're detailed as it should be. And Lola, I don't know if you want to chime in on that.
Also, once you get and use the IEP guidance, the KVEC has come up with a great tool. It's the IEP coaching tool. We just kind of went over that in our DRT meeting earlier with our teachers to pass along to their teachers within their building. And, once you get to that present levels and start working on the IEP and the goals and the accommodation, and what do I need to write? What components do I need to make sure that I'm including in that IEP? So that KVEC IEP coaching tool that is also out is scripted and has examples and resources links where they can actually, and I would love to have had that when I started teaching.
That's what everyone said as they were developing that here. I mean, and they worked really hard on that. They put a lot of thought into it.
Even having the guidance document itself, you know, when I first started in the business, like Lola said, you wrote IEPs in blue ink and it's triplicate. And so just having a document like that would have been, oh my gosh. I mean, I thought, well, I mean, it's because it would be like it was written for you. You just got to put in the correct data and baseline data and things that you need in order to meet your own student needs. But as far as having a format, it's already there for you.
Yeah.
It's written for you.
It is. That's great. I'm so glad that you all brought that up and that you're using it because, like I said, a lot of thought, a lot of work went into developing that piece. And I looked at it with eyes as someone who, you know, my background is gen ed and I have a math intervention background. And then obviously I'm a math consultant, but I looked at it with eyes, you know, I could have taken that tool. I mean, I can take that tool and I think I can write the goals that I need to write following that tool because it was.
You know, we have tried to start a new teacher college raise, what we call it, and try to do a couple 1-hour trainings per month. And one of those coming up, there's so much to start with, especially with when you got teachers who are math teachers that may have not ever been in the teaching field period to begin with. There's so many different places to start, but one of those is going over the actual IEP guidance document with them so they can know how to utilize the document when they're doing their IEPs.
Right. Well, that's great to hear that you all are using that tool. So are there other tools and resources that you're using? Is particularly for math or whenever you talk to teachers about that?
If we're particularly talking about math, you know, some of the documents that come to mind that we would like staff to utilize and should be utilizing for one is the math progression tables. There's also the math grade level placemats. And I know this could be a foreign language to somebody, or to some, but you know, these are documents that are out there, they're already developed and they're aligned, you know, with the content. So the other thing is the actual grade level standards in the math and in the Kentucky Core Academic Standards. And then you even get to where there is a standard descriptors that can need to be utilized. I mean, the thing about it is I think we think sometimes that you just put a goal down for math and that's it. That's not, there's more goes into that. If you're writing a good goal for a student that's really struggling, you need to utilize all the documents that are available within that content area, whether it be reading, writing, math, whatever, in order to develop a good goal with a good objective. So, you know, even when we talk about learning targets, we utilize those in alternate assessment and for those kids. So there's a ton of resources that are available online, you know, even including trainings from different, there's district pacing guides. We have pacing guides that are set up. So we have in our district a math consultant, we have a math supervisor at the district level, which also allows for us to focus on our teachers and what they're implementing when it comes to that content area. And I don't know if Lola wants to maybe tell me on some things too as well.
A Google Drive set up from our district standpoint for all math teachers that have resources included in that by grade level.
Yeah.
You know, and all of our math teachers, you know, we've had to adapt to the technology and to provide, you know, instruction virtually nowadays. So we made sure that, you know, all the math department, especially, which is going to be fading to other departments as well, but all the math teachers in our district, 3rd to 8th grade, they have Surface Pro tablets or they have the touchscreen Chromebooks. That way they can, and now we're branching that off to our special ed teachers as well. I think Mr. Caldwell has going to start buying some more technology for those special ed teachers as well to try to pass that along to them.
And we don't want to forget even some basic things, you know, like our screeners, our map screeners, you know, for our students, even the Brigance at kindergarten level, you know, even your white, your Westler, intelligent tests that we do for academics on our students, those sub scores. There's so many things that are so important that, you know, your progress monitoring from your previous school, you know, and I mean, just everything. There's so many documents, there's so many things that are important that go into just developing a good IEP goal and objective for a student. It's not just something that's put down on paper in 5 minutes if a teacher wants it to really be effective for the child.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense. It makes sense because, you know, we think about these children, obviously IEPs, they're individualized. And so you're right, it takes all those different pieces of data that we have on that child in order to determine where they're at and where we want to get them to. And of course, like you said, I heard you mention the standards, those KY standards. You know, I do a lot of work with that document, and I personally, I love the design of it. I love the way that it has that coherence piece with it, and the teachers can see, look ahead on that standard, or they can look back and see and do a backwards design as to get to that standard.
And you and I are talking about the standards. That's why it's important for our teachers to understand why is it important for me as a SPED teacher, in which it's more easy to understand about the standards with the reg, but why is it important as a SPED teacher to understand that? And it goes back to the conversation we're having right now is you've got to know those standards in order to be able to write an effective IEP goal and objective for your students.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And
like,
content.
Right. And I just, you know, I made the statement this morning that, you know, our SPED students, they're gen ed students first. So
yes.
Gen ed students, we teach them by looking at our standards. So obviously we have to look at our standards as well and just go above and beyond with that standard.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I was explaining, we was doing a training this morning, and I was explaining to those that were in that training that, you know, I think sometimes we get the feeling that when a kid's in the SPED program, they're in there for life. And that's not the goal.
No.
The goal is for them to be in there, get the services and the help that they need, and then for them to exit the program as soon as they can. So, you know, it goes back to everybody knowing why the program is there and how to utilize it.
Exactly. That's a very good point. I'm glad you brought that up, that we write those goals in mind that, okay, this may be the goal that will get them caught up and get them to the point that they no longer need those. That's, to me, that should be our goal when we're writing goals for our kids.
And
have that in mind.
The other thing to remember too is that, you know, the goal may be working now. That's why you progress monitor, because 2 weeks down the line, something, the goal may not be as effective, and then you're going to have a meeting to amend the IEP to possibly revamp that goal. So I think sometimes we think that, oh, well, I've got the goal done, and that's all there is to it, and it's not. There's that's why you got to progress monitor effectively in order to make sure that that goal is still being effective for that child.
Very good point. Very good point. Lola, you have anything else to add to that?
Now that, you know, with math, I think our instructional supervisor at the central office level and our math curriculum coach, they're going to be doing some tier 3 screenings with the Colorado Metropolitan Math Intervention Team screeners, and they're going to start that. So that in itself will help with referrals for special ed as well, because you'll have another piece of document that's going to help you verify later on, you know, if they get the referral, you know, what areas that you'll need to write those goals for.
Right.
So that's going to be really useful. It's all first and second graders is what they're going to start with in the next coming week or so. So I thought that would be an aid, you know, to help with those future referrals if there's any.
Absolutely.
Using that component, screener for math.
For sure.
Absolutely. Anytime we can narrow it down and focus and pinpoint exactly where the problem's at, and then go from there. So obviously, the more data we get, the better off we can narrow that down. And
I tell these new teachers coming in, everything's driven by data. If you don't have data to support it, I mean, then how are you basing that you're making a decision on changing something that's important to that child's program. So, you know, it's a data-driven world, and that's the same with the student IEP.
True, very true. Very good point. And again, it comes back to that progress monitoring point that you mentioned earlier too, right? I mean, to me, that's.
Yeah, very important. I think, you know, I can remember going through a monitoring visit by KDE, but one of the things they really look at in depth is your progress monitoring on your student IEPs. And because that, again, is what you're supposed to be utilizing to make decisions. And if you don't have good progress monitoring, then the first thing they're going to ask you is how did you make that decision? So.
Yeah. Right. Which comes back to writing a good goal that can be measured, right? We have to be able to monitor it. You know, that's one aspect of a good goal, is that it can be monitored and measured.
Yes. Yeah, and that's the thing about the guidance document. It tells you exactly how to write it so that it can be measured. And so, because, you know, in years past, we had goals that were written that were not that measurable. And the first thing that they would say is, well, how are you measuring that? Where's all I call it the ingredients that's required for it to be a measurable goal. So there's specific, you know, parts of a goal that have to be in there in order for it to be measurable.
Yes, right. Okay. So let's move on to that next question. It says, how do you determine the appropriate goal and accommodations to match the skill deficit? So we talked about that a little bit already. Is there anything else you'd want to elaborate on that?
I would. One of the most important things there is I think you've got to really, when you get a report back, and I'm talking about an evaluation report back on a student, you really have to look into the subscores that are on that goal or on that report. And what I mean by that is, how did that child academically perform in areas of reading, writing, math, when it comes to the evaluation itself? And because those sub areas give you a lot of information within those academic areas, and, you know, to determine weaknesses. So we actually today, Lola and I were looking. I said, well, give me a copy of the report on that kid so I can look at their sub scores, just to see how they're actually performing in those areas. Because those sub scores should be a true indicator of what that kid is doing or able to do and not do. And so I think sometimes we overlook that part of a report in order to determine the weaknesses. So that's along with student work samples. But I really push when I talk to teachers about trying to make a good decision on a child is looking at those subscores within those academic areas on that report, because those can tell you exactly where a child is performing or not performing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. It does. It's just another way of narrowing it down, right? Really getting a good focus on it.
And then the other thing is, what skill areas does the student need to improve to access and make progress within the general curriculum? You ask yourself that, and then revert back to these areas. And so we pay close attention to the evaluation report. I think sometimes we just say, oh, well, we've got a report, and we focus and we get tunnel vision is what I call it, on what the ABI and the IQ's telling us, but are we really looking in depth into what the report's showing us for the child and how they're performing?
Okay.
So that's the things that we really push when it comes to determining skill deficit and things like that, is looking at reports, in other words, going back and looking at a kid's map data and saying, well, where is this kid performing or not performing? And I think what you got to do is you got to take all the data that you may have and look at it and measure how the kid's performing or not performing in order to make into determining, you know, the skill deficit, so to speak. Lola, you want to?
Yeah, I totally agree. And then teacher observation, you know, prefer, what their intake on it all too.
Mhm.
Try to get, how's their kid doing when I'm not in there? Because as a sped teacher, you're not in there constantly.
Right.
So is it just in this area, or is it several times, different subjects? And so you can get a clear picture too by having all the input of the people and the staff that works with that
Right,
student.
right. I'm glad you brought that up, because bringing everybody on board, right?
Yes.
Everybody
Yes.
that has a part in it. Yes. Very good point there. Yes, I agree. So how do you ensure compliance, that your goals are good goals and that there are progress monitoring and all those types of things?
Well, one of the things that we try to do is we're doing some kind of monitoring. We talked about progress monitoring, but we're at the district level. We're always trying to do some kind of monitoring. One of the most common monitoring things that we do is timeline monitoring when it comes to referrals and things of that nature. So one of the things that we try to do, or are beginning to try to do, is kill two birds with one stone, as my dad used to say, is monitoring in IC is the best way to do that. Is while you're monitoring for timelines, you can also monitor and say, hey, look at the objectives and say, does this objective have all the components that the IEP guidance document says it's supposed to have? And we don't want to utilize that as I got you. It's more as a thing to say is, hey, this needs to be written this way in order to meet the criteria for a good IEP goal on a child. So that's one of the things that we try to do is try to find multiple ways to monitor within Infinite Campus, and I call it all IC for short, but Lola, I don't know.
Yeah, and we're learning all these new reports, which Harvey, he's been doing it longer than me. I'm just kind of on board as a new person, but I'm learning all these like quad sped reports that, tells you if an IEP is unlocked, if it's at a timeline. And so running all these new reports, but actually going in once you see that and looking at the actual IEP through IC, and trying to help that way as well. But then these reports now kind of help as well with timeline issues and with just IEPs unlocked, or a primary disability is not identified. So these reports now in IC really helps us on our end to see the whole picture as far as all schools.
Yeah.
And just not, just certain schools.
Well, that's great. Yes. I'm sure that's a huge help to be able to do that. Yes.
It is. And then the other thing too is I think some of the other things too is important is getting as a SPED teacher, is getting a regular ed teacher perspective on it as well. You need to buy in from them. They are the ones that actually know the content. I always say that the regular ed teacher is the content person. The SPED teacher is just how you're going to get from A to B. And so we always want their input. And I know we was talking about monitoring, but I want to go back to goal writing. It's important to have them a part of that as process as well, because they are the actual ones that do know the content.
Right.
So we'll leave them out.
Yeah, I agree. It needs to be a team. I solely agree with that. That's how the kids are going to get the best that we have to offer, is if we all work together and we all put down on paper what we know about that child, and then go from there and
Yes.
write those realistic goals. Yes, challenging, but realistic for the kids.
Yes.
Yes. So do you have any final advice, final words that you'd like to share with us?
It's been a crazy year. The first thing I would say is hang in there. We faced a lot of unknowns. I will say that I think it's getting a little more towards some normal ways. I still think we're probably a few ways away from that for down the road. I think it's coming that we can get back to normal a little bit. The one thing I try to tell my staff is don't freak out. We've tried to do things the right way. We understand that there's going to be some issues, and what you got to keep in mind is, the kids have been through a lot, and we want them back in person, and we are going in person, and we feel like that's important. And but I want our teachers to keep their head up, and if they need anything from us, then we'll help them in any way that we can. And I do appreciate the opportunity, Vonda and you and Stephanie, for giving us to be a part of this podcast. First time I've ever done anything like this, and I thought it was a privilege to be asked to do that.
Well, we are honored to have you.
It.
Yes, we are. We feel truly honored to have you all to join us, and you shared great tips and points that you're doing within your district. But I think it's something that, and like we said when we were planning for this, all districts are different, of course, and everyone
Sure.
does things a little differently. But it's good advice for everyone that you shared with us today. So
well, that's what we want to do. Is we want something that everybody can take from it, not just just our district, but the region as a whole.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I think that's true today. That's very true today,
Yes.
Harvey.
Thank you. And like I said, we appreciate the opportunity, and if there's anything that we can do for you, just let us know. And if anybody, got any questions, then feel free to call us, email us, text us. So we're more than glad to try to help in any way that we can.
And we appreciate that. Thank you. Stephanie's going to sign us off here.
All right. We want
All
to
right.
thank everyone for joining us this week for our Exceptional Educators Playbook in Mathematics. I am very excited today that we've learned the process of the correctly determining a goal and accommodations, and for the deeper understanding the resources and even strategies that we are using. We would like for you to visit our math podcast, Google Classroom, and the classroom code for that is FNJPQQN. Or you can email me at stephaniekid@theholler.org or Miss Vonda Adams at vonda.adams@theholler.org. You can also visit our Facebook page at KVEC Exceptional Children, or on Instagram at KVECEC. You can visit theholler.org, KVEC, and then underneath of that, KVEC SPED, to view this along with other previous podcasts. We hope that you enjoyed what we watched today, and we would love to talk to you next time about specially designed instruction. And until then, we'll holler at you later.